Hello again. My topic today is confidently healing the sick. Now, Jesus confidently healed all who were sick and were willing to listen to him. And what I want to examine with you in this teaching is how he could be so assured that people would rise up from their paralysis, throw off their blindness, deafness, and other afflictions. His disciple Matthew, who was a Jewish tax collector before becoming a follower, knew the Old Testament scriptures, and often in his gospel he cited how Jesus fulfilled the prophetic words of those who had lived even centuries before him. One such example, of course, is Jesus' own birth in fulfillment of Isaiah 7:14. Jesus wouldn't even have been born of a virgin unless the prophet hadn't announced it. But our study today is healing. So from Matthew 8:16 and 17, this is what he wrote as an eyewitness. When evening came, they brought to him many under the power of demons, and he drove out the spirits with a word, and restored to health all who were sick. He thus fulfilled what was spoken by the prophet Isaiah, and that's a quote from Isaiah 53. So let's see what Isaiah in fact wrote about 800 years ago, before Christ was born. Speaking of the suffering servant, he prophesied, "He was wounded for our transgressions, bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and with his stripes we are healed." Now, Isaiah was a prophet or seer. He had the spiritual gift of being able to go into the future. He saw the future. He saw the beating and the scourging that Pilate's soldiers afflicted on Christ just before the crucifixion. It was at that moment of time that Jesus bore our sickness and carried our diseases when he was flogged, scourged by the Roman soldiers. But Isaiah, as a seer, he went into the future and he saw it happen. And on the basis of that prophetic word, Jesus had the legal authority to fulfill that word and to heal the sick, even though the actual payment had not been made. He healed, as it were, on account, you could say that. Now, because Isaiah had spoken, "We are healed," Jesus could act, just as in the same way he'd spoken, he was able to be born of a virgin, as I mentioned. Now, this is how God operates. In Amos 3:7 from the Amplified Bible, Amos wrote, "Surely the Lord God will do nothing without revealing his secret to his servants, the prophets." Isaiah saw the whipping of Christ way ahead of time. The Apostle Peter, who was physically present a bit at a distance, in Luke 22:54, he witnessed the horrible scene, and in his epistle he wrote, "By his wounds," or his stripes, "you have been healed." Have been. Now, Peter was looking back and proclaimed that the healing had been accomplished. Isaiah was looking forward and used the present tense to state the same truth. Now, whether looking back or looking forward, it amounts to the same thing. But the fact is that Jesus could confidently heal on the basis of the prophet's word. So what can these thoughts do for us? If we're sick or ministering to the sick, firstly, we must consider that the payment of sickness is finished. It's a finished work. We do not have to beg God to heal. He's already done it. so we can place our confidence in the accomplished sacrifice. Hebrews 10 and verse 14. If it's done, we can be confident it's already done. We don't have to ask God to do something in the future. In Romans chapter 6, the Apostle Paul writes and repeats the truth that the old man, our old nature, was crucified with Christ. Romans 6 and verses 1 to 10. And then in verse 11 he says, consider yourself dead to sin. In other words, consider it to be so. Even if we have symptoms, go beyond the symptoms and consider yourself to be healed. Consider it to be so. Believe it to be so. Now, in order to do this, you have to ask yourself 3 vital questions. First question, am I afraid to die? Now, unless you get past this one, we will remain slaves to the fear of death all our lives, as is mentioned in Hebrews 2 and verse 15. Why is that? Because if we're not afraid to die, then we can go out on a limb and believe God. But if we are afraid to die, then we can't make this step of faith. We can't believe it to be so because we're too frightened. We're frightened of dying. So we've got to lose this fear of death. It's got to be settled. We will not overcome sickness unless we get past this first point. The second question, if Jesus was standing in front of you and he asked you, do you think I missed paying for your particular disease? Suppose you had cancer or diabetes or something like that, something pretty grave. And Jesus is standing in front of you. Did I miss cancer when I paid with my beating? Did I miss diabetes? Did I miss whatever your disease is? What would you say if he asked you that? I'm sure that you would acknowledge that he did not miss any sickness or any disease. He paid for them all. Thirdly, as Jesus was physically there when it happened, taking the cruel blows of the whip, do you think that he believes that he fully paid for your sickness? He believes he did. So we need to believe he did. If we are afraid to die, we will not overcome sickness. Overcomers believe in the blood of the Lamb and testify to that blood, but they also have not got to love their lives even unto death. Revelation 12 verse 11. So that's the first obstacle, the first hurdle. We get over that and not love our lives even to death. We're willing to die. Then we can go further and realize that Jesus didn't forget anything. He didn't forget any sickness in your body or the people that you're ministering to, and he believes he fully paid. A.W. Tozer, a great Christian writer, he defined true faith when we deliberately put ourselves in a position that if God fails us, then we could die. If we're not willing to do that, then we're not in true faith. He defined false faith as always having a fallback option, just in case God does not come through for us. For example, we believe we're healed, but we keep the contact details of the doctor, specialist, surgery, chemotherapy clinic, just in case. This is double-minded, and we will never receive anything from the Lord. Read James 1 verses 4 to 8. So if you're sick, get rid of the options. Go out on a limb. Show God that you're not afraid of dying. It is on the basis of God's unchangeable and absolute truth that we cannot only receive our healing, but we can confidently minister to those in need around us. Well, David, all that's very good teaching, good doctrine, but how does it work? Well, this last few days, my wife and I visited some neighbours. We went there confidently, and the man had a very, very bad back. He loved his garden. He does love his garden, and he couldn't do his gardening very well because of this intense pain in his back. I laid hands on his back and commanded the sickness to leave, and an intense heat came right down from the cervical to the lumbar vertebrae, and he was instantly healed. I did it in confidence. I'm not saying that to boast. I did it because I know that this word I told to you today, I've told you about today, this word is true. We can rest on the fact that on the basis of God's absolute word, we reckon it to be so. We believe it to be so. And so we can move confidently. We're not beggars. We're not having to rely upon maybe God being in a good mood. He's already done it. And therefore, we can be confident in healing the sick. God bless you. I'll see you next month.